When? Hey guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session is part 2 of the Sensor Sense show by Alex McConahay. And Alex is suffering from some technical issues, so I am hoping to stall for a little while. And what better way to stall is to show off our image of the week. And let's see here. I'm going to share full screen and then pop over here. And this is this image of the week is by Greg Allegretti, and it's Able 39, so a nice little planetary nebula. Maybe that's Alex's technical difficulties catching back up, but I'm going to check that out in 1 second. But yeah, nice little planetary nebula. And I did send out an invite to Greg if he wants to pop into this room or the room next week. Just well, you can respond to your invite tonight or drop me a message on Google+, and we'll get you in next week. I'm going to take back my camera because I cannot see Alex. There we go. I see him shaking his hands, but I don't know if I think we're still having the same technical difficulties. So what do we have to do? Well, I can talk about, I know 2 weeks ago I mentioned that I was having this issue with my Edge, and I can talk about that for a little bit. So, yeah, after troubleshooting everything, and I'm not convinced it's gone yet, but after troubleshooting everything, I took my focal reducer off and put the camera back on. So I was shooting at f10 with the Edge, and sure enough, my elongation disappeared. Now, I'm not convinced it's just the focal reducer. I mentioned this last time. I mentioned this previously, but I thought it had something to do with vibration. And Alex, if you ever if you get this figured out, you need to say something or test out your microphone. Just scream out, and I'll stop talking. But yeah, so I thought it had something to do with my vibration for my camera. And when I removed my focal reducer, I put on one of these precise parts adapters that I had made, and I put my camera back on, and I turned my camera on, and I just put my fingers up to my camera, and I noticed that all that vibration I was feeling in my camera seemed to be dampened by the really big, thick, chunky, precise parts adapter that I had. And I have a feeling it had to do with a combination of the focal reducer and the way the image train is kind of extended off the back of the Edge, and the little thin Celestron T adapter that I had. So very well, that might have been part of it, or it could completely be the focal reducer, and it was just some odd aberration that the focal reducer was showing up. So I don't know what to make of that, but I don't know if anyone nearby has been wanting to try a Celestron focal reducer and wants to waste some time. Let me know, and I'll send mine to you, and you can test it out and tell me if it's screwy on your setup or not. But I did have elongation. So the odd thing is I did have elongation with the focal reducer when I put my DSLR on it. And there's no vibration coming from the DSLR, so I have to assume that, I don't know, I have to assume it is the focal reducer. And I've complained about the focal reducer in the past, so I think you guys kind of know that. But I don't know, that's been my issue. And since I've been so frustrated with since I've been frustrated shooting at they say f10, but it's actually f10.45, I believe. So that little half a stop, or not even half a stop, but half a point, I guess, on the f ratio seems to make a difference. And I'm not able to shoot at f7, which is what the focal reducer gets me to. So I was so frustrated with that, I ended up going out and, well, you know, going out shopping and checking Astromart, and I ordered, well, from previously owned RC, a 10-inch RC. So yeah, you're going to see me shooting some diffraction spikes in the near future. I hope. We'll see. We'll see how this thing works out for me. Hopefully, I won't be struggling with issues with this, but I'm kind of optimistic. And the plan with that is to reduce it down to f5.6 or something like that. So I will get the same I will get the same field of view, or really roughly the same field of view that I get with my edge reduced with this RC reduced. And then I'll have about a full f-stop. I'll be a full f-stop faster. So that should, well, we'll see what that should do. I see Alex is still disappearing. He's having issues with his microphone. So, and seems like, well, this is the first time we've had to do this. Seems like every time we've ever had technical issues, we got them figured out with about 1 minute to spare before the show went live. So now we know exactly what we want to do. And let me think. The other thing I can show off is, now a lot of you guys that are hanging out on AstroBin or on Cloudy Nights may have seen this, but I'll show off my recent image. There you go. M57, the Ring Nebula, and because it can handle it, I'm going to zoom you right in there a little bit. And my goal with this, first of all, this is a narrowband bicolor image. So my goal with this was to reveal some of that outer halo. And over the course of the next few weeks or the next few clear nights, I'm going to continue shooting it, and I'm going to try and reveal more and more of the outer halo, hoping to just, I don't know, reveal more. You'll notice there's an inner, well, there's the ring, and then there's that inner halo right there, and then there's just some faint hints of the outer wispiness. And if you had seen some of the images posted on Cloudy Nights, and of course the APOD winning images, you will see that there have been really some excellent renditions of this. One of them, well, for one thing, I don't know how many of you guys use this as a resource, but is it Bill Snyder's website? Hey, I'm trying, you know what? I'm trying to delay right now, so maybe I'll show you that. Bill Snyder's website. This is another great resource. I'm sorry, I get lost in these windows here. You're going to see me. So check that rendition out by Bill Snyder, and he really picked up a lot of that outer nebula. But the cool thing, and that it's not just his image that I want to show you, and we've mentioned this in the past. Bill posts his what his individual subs look like. That's a 20-minute H alpha frame, 20-minute O3 frame, 20-minute S2 frame, but as well, he shows what each individual channel stacked looks like. And that really is an insane, just an insane looking ring right there. 30 20-minute subs, so 600 minutes combined just for the H alpha channel, 480 minutes combined for the O3 channel, and 560 minutes combined for the S2. Yeah, S2 is always a disappointment. That's why I never bought that filter. But well, maybe there are targets where S2 isn't a disappointment, but I guess on this one, there's just not much there. Sometimes that's how I feel with O3. But yeah, you get you put 28 hours into an image, and you really reveal a lot. And as well as just all that time, of course, he's got some amazing processing skills. Coming back around, my workflow as always for that is PixInsight into Photoshop, and so I binned this M57 image, and it's one of the first images that I've binned. And I know Richard Flynn on Cloudy Nights has been binning his narrowband data and putting out excellent image after excellent image, and I said he's onto something. Also using an 8300 camera. And I'll tell you, when I first started shooting with my 8300 camera, I was mostly doing RGB, and I noticed the what looked like blooms, but they don't call them blooms, they call them horizontal registers. And after shooting a few RGBs and seeing that, I said, whoa, I'm staying away from binning on the 8300 chip. But with narrowband, it doesn't really show up. So I don't quite know what I was doing wrong. It's possible that I was overexposing, and when the chip gets to a certain saturation level, then that's where they show up, just like a bloom would. And with narrowband, it just doesn't show up. But the odd thing is, it's on stars. It was primarily on stars even then. So yeah. Hey, Alex, we see you.
I'm back, but I'm on my iPhone. I'm not on my either of my computers that I've got sitting here working.
Okay, let me think if we can figure out a workaround to this.
I'm working on it right now. So you guys do what you need, and if I get back in a couple of minutes, great. And if I don't, well, we'll have to reschedule me.
Okay, now if you are, is it a PowerPoint presentation?
I'm what?
Is it a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, it's a PowerPoint presentation.
This is going to sound odd, but if you want to email me your PowerPoint presentation, I can flip through the slides as you dialogue via your iPhone.
Okay.
If you want to spend a few minutes working on it, you can. I can still.
Okay. Got asked a question today, and why don't you guys start answering this question for me?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a couple questions that came in.
Yeah, explain digitization and gain and ADC, which is analog digital conversion rather than ADU, which is just basically what an ADU is. Why don't you explain that while I see if I get my sound working, okay?
Okay.
Where did those questions come from?
They came from comments, but now I see a few questions in...
Yeah, I was going to say there's some in Q&A.
Yeah, I'll get to those questions in comments in a second. I'm going to start with the Q&A questions just because they're right in front of me right now. Is there a way to have Google Plus show the most recent events at the top? I had to search to get this link. So Google Plus, kind of, but the easiest way to look at that would be to go to our YouTube page. And when you go to our YouTube page, just look at all of our videos, and you will see them in order of when they were released. That's probably the easiest way. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Alex, I'm going to go to this one first. Someone's mentioning that Windows 10 update from this week reset some audio channels. So check your audio settings. That could have something to do with it.
Oh, yeah, that was for me, right?
Yes, that was for you.
I'm listening to you off in the distance, but I'm okay. I've got 3 different examples. Okay.
Bill K is asking date for the new Cassegrain from AP.
The last 15 minutes in my system settings.
I'm sorry, what was that?
That's where I've been for the last 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. So he's ahead of that. So Roland did not give a date, but I did hear at the time that there was no wait list. Now that doesn't mean you get it immediately, but that probably means that you don't have to wait 8 years to have it. I would call them up and ask them. Well, if you're interested in buying one. I don't know how many they're planning on producing. It honestly looks like a really interesting system, and it's a divergence from what they do typically, so they probably have no clue how much interest there will be. But I was not shocked by the price. The price seemed somewhat reasonable for what it was. So if they're competing with some of the bigger guns out there, pretty good competition. But right now I'm going to actually jump into those questions because I remember that. I remember seeing that. Can you explain what ADC is and what's the difference between 12-bit, 14-bit, and 16-bit ADC? What is bit depth? Okay, ADC, analog digital converter, and the ADC is basically the I'm going to call it a processor, but it's within the camera, and it converts the charge. So basically when you're shooting the photons... Ooh, that was terrible. So basically when you're shooting, the photons hits your pixel, and it's read off the camera, but when the camera's reading it, it starts as... Alex, is that you? I don't know what that was. So it starts as a charge, and the camera has to convert it to a number. so it can send it over the computer, and the computer has something to do with it. So basically, the ADC converts the charge in electrons, or I'm actually not sure electronically what it would be, and kind of the voltage to a number. And I'm actually not 100% certain how they distinguish between 12, 14, and 16 bits, whether that all happens on the digital side or whether it's involved with the processor. I do know that David Alt is in the room, and he probably knows the answer to that.
Yeah, I can answer this one. So generally what's happening is a photon strikes a pixel on a sensor, and that is converted into electronic charge via the photoelectric effect. And that charge is shifted around based on how the mechanism is built. You know, it's different between CMOS and CCDs. But ultimately, it ends up at an amplifier, and the amplifier boosts the signal a little bit, and then it is sensed, right, by an ADC unit, an analog to digital converter. And there's lots of different structures there, but the bit depth, 12-bit, 14-bit, 16-bit, tells essentially how many gradations that converter can sense in the charge that it's trying to sense. So a 16-bit converter has something like 96 decibels of dynamic range. I can't remember what a 12-bit is, but it's significantly less. Let's see, I can calculate that real quick. To the 12th, 4096, and take the log of that, times 20, so that's 72 decibel dynamic range. So there's a big difference in dynamic range, and that essentially means that stars, which have very large dynamic range or things like that, will be limited in what you can discern. All right, so that's really the function of it. You know, you have to take something that's an electronic charge on a device and turn it into something that's digital, and that all that is really doing. And a 16-bit ADC will produce something in the range from 0 to 65535 ADU values, because there are 16 bits. So 2 to the 16th gives you 65K gradations of intensity. A 12-bit ADU will only give you 4096. Right. An 8-bit will only give you 256. Right. So it gives you more levels to try to pick out different granularity changes in the voltages and electronic charge coming from the sensor.
Thanks, David. The other question, and this we're not sure about the answer to this one yet. What do you think about the new CMOS chip, like on the ASI 1600M? Is that the new way for imaging deep sky? Well, I think Tolga is one of the first people to have one of these cameras, and he's been posting some info about it on. I think I see what Alex is doing right now, and I think it's going to work. Alex, you just scream out and tell me when you're ready. Tolga is one of the first people demoing one of these, or beta testing one of these cameras, and he's got to post some info posted on Cloudy Nights. In general, that camera looks really interesting, pretty much due to the price, but it does seem like CMOS is the way we're all going. In some cases, because there's some things they can do better. They can read out a lot faster. In some sense, it's because the CCD manufacturers are just themselves moving away from it. Astrophotography is not their primary, or astrophotographers aren't their primary market. They're trying to make cameras for everyone, and the certain things that we look for in cameras aren't necessarily the same things that other people look for. I like to say what's good for the goose is what's good for the gander. We like low noise cameras that in a terrestrial photography sense, I guess you would say, boost the shadows, where you can take an image of pretty much a black bear at night and boost the shadows until it looks like a bear walking around in the daytime. But at the same time, you have some sacrifices to that. That said, if you can get a CMOS sensor that displays a very random noise profile, that has low bias, that has low dark current. The CMOS technology is a bit better. They do a lot of things on chip or per pixel that really make a lot of things better. Like I said, it can read out a lot faster. There are I don't know, as has been said recently, CCDs are very mature, and we're only really seeing the beginning of CMOS sensors and what they can really do.
The biggest difference between the CMOS and CCD technology is that CMOS has a lot of other associated circuitry at a per pixel level. And this reduces the amount of area for photon capture, the amount of area for the charge well, and there's also a lot more wires in front of the photo site, which means that there's more light bounced back up. And so they tend to be a little bit less efficient. Things like the shaved back illuminated sensors, those have kind of broken that mold, right? So you end up with things now where the light's coming in from behind where there's no circuitry in front, and you actually use the bulk silicon to do some of your electron storage. So you kind of get past your minimum well depth and reflected light issues, right? You know, the rest of the technology is fine. I mean, the fundamental aspects of how charge is stored and everything is the same. But they do a lot of additional things. There's amplifiers on each cell rather than just one large one at the end, and there's small amplifiers just to get the signal up onto a wire so you can transfer it and do a whole bunch of reading of cells at one time, things like this. So there's lots of advantages. The primary one is just speed, right? You can read out the chip significantly faster. But that technology has been pushed a lot further than what the CMOS technology has been pushed, primarily for things like cell phones. So that's why it's improving. It's not that the CCD technology couldn't be just as good. It's just that they're pushing that side because that's where the market is. Right.
Yep. Yeah, and within a few years, everyone's car is going to have something like 100 different sensors on it, and they're all going to be CMOS. And Chevy and Ford and Tesla and all these companies and Apple Car, they're all going to be paying lots and lots of money to these sensor companies. So these sensor companies are going where the market is. And for them, and for a lot of these companies, not the astrophotography guys, but for people who are using them for very, very specific things, you can also integrate the processing right onto the sensor circuit, I believe. So if they don't have to get a pretty picture off of it, they don't have to really use any of that stuff, but if they need to get some really quick data off of it, they can. And I think that's one of the things that's going on as well. Oh, something just popped up and disappeared. I think that was the only real question in comments.
Yeah, there's one. So the new one is, I've seen a terrific image from M51 from what's this? Cricomp, made with a ASI 1600 Cool, and there's a link to it.
Adam, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Alex.
Okay. Let me start some screen sharing here and see if this works, okay? Entire screen. Share. Sorry for the delay, everybody in the world out there. And going over to PowerPoint. And going up to, there we go. And start the show. Am I working?
You're working.
And you can see my slides?
We can see your slides, yep.
Okay, so I'll just sit here and talk to you. Hi, everybody. I'm going to cut this a little shorter than I would. What am I, 20 minutes late? 25 minutes late, I'm sorry. Just couldn't get the sound to work for some reason on two of my computers. So I'm talking to you on my phone while showing you pictures on part 2, the Sensor Sense show. This one, we're going to talk about the big question. But before I do, I wanted to remind you that anybody who is in Southern California and is coming to our TMC, David Alt, who is here with us tonight, is going to be giving a presentation. So we've got a pretty good registration for it, but we always welcome more. And get in touch with me if you want to get registered before the show, or show up at the show, and maybe there'll be room for you. So here we go. Sensor Sense, part 2 is the big questions. And I previewed this a couple of weeks ago, and I said that there are lots of questions people want to ask about stuff and when they're buying a camera. And so we're going to go over some of the big issues. It should be of interest to somebody who's a beginner. They don't know what some of these terms mean. They seem thrown around in the ads, and they just want to know what they mean. If you're about to modify your DSLR to do something else, well, you're going to want to know what this is about. If you're in transition, you're trying to decide whether you should buy whether you should move up to a CCD cooled Astro camera or something like that. Or if you're just trying to figure out if you've got the right tube for your camera. All these things are going to be covered tonight. What we're not going to cover is necessarily what the latest and greatest is. What specific sensor you should buy. I'm not qualified to do that. I just don't, remember all that stuff in my brain. I'm not into that kind of buying. There are, however, other people on this forum here that would just love to answer those kind of questions, and so please give them a chance to answer those questions by first off signing into your Google Plus account. And then you can, as you're following along on YouTube here, you can type in any questions you've got and make any comments you've got. So, 2 weeks ago, we gave the first part of this presentation. You don't need to have seen that, but we ended up saying that what you really want in a camera gives you extremely low noise and wide dynamic range. That means you want sensitivity, a good well depth, the best signal to noise ratio you can get. You want the widest dynamic range as expressed in decibels. You want a relatively high digitization level, and you want the pixel and chip dimensions to somewhat match your telescope. Now we'll be bringing up all those terms again tonight. If you're a little unfamiliar with them, type a question over there. Type a question and we'll go back and answer them. Now, these are the big questions, and we'll go through them one by one and answer them as we go along, hopefully. And but Sammy wrote in and asked, and while I was futzing around, you guys got to work on that. What is ADC, he was saying, and I answered for ADU, which is ADC is the analog digital converter.
Okay, Alex, we might have lost you. I don't know if you can see this or hear this. He might still be talking, and he might not know this. I just want to drop a text in so he sees this, which he may or may not. Ooh, what the heck? I'm sorry. And I might, oh man. And I want to see if maybe I can send him a message via the phone. I'm sorry, guys. Bear with me real quick. Oh, I know I have his number here somewhere. Way, way back.
I think he lost his phone connection. It just dropped off.
Yeah, that's what I think happened. Does anyone have Alex's phone number? I don't know if anyone in the room has it. I have it from last year, but I have to go way, way back. Let's see. I just hope he's not still talking, thinking we're right there.
His slides are moving forward, and I see his cursor moving, so I think he does.
Okay, I've got his phone number, so hopefully this is him. Otherwise, I'm calling someone randomly. Hey, yeah, Alex, we lost you. I think we just lost your phone connection. So yeah, your phone dropped out of Google Hangouts. So I don't know. Look at your phone and see if it's okay. Got him. Perfect. Okay. So I am gonna go back to stalling here. Let's see.
Am I back in?
Back in. Yes. Perfect.
Well, how far back should I go?
We got to the. We were right there, and I want to say nope, nope.
Okay. This is the review. If you've only got one bit, you've only got two steps. And as you go along further, oh, now where does it show up? This is a posterized picture. It's only got, I think, 8 levels of data, either very bright, medium, a little bit darker than medium, all the way to dark. You know, only 8 levels. This one over here has 256 levels, and you can see the gradation. Well, the problem is that when we start a picture, we start way over here, right? Okay, and then we have to expand. This is our original picture we get. We have to expand that histogram so that it has all those different levels if we want to get something as pretty as Rob Gendler can put out. All right, so that's where you need more levels worth of data. And if you've only got 4096, which is what you get with 12, you're not going to be able to expand it very much. If you've got 64,000, 65,000 something here, with the 16-bit, well, you can expand this little bit more into this before you start getting those ugly posterizations. And that's why digitization, that's why the higher level is important. Let's go down to the first big question. Should you buy a cooled astro camera or a DSLR, a conventional digital camera? By astro camera here, I mean something that was designed from the start to be used in astronomy. When I say that, I fully realize that a lot of these things are designed to be used in surgery and scientific studies of other sorts, or to be put on a microscope. But we're going to consider that they're going to be used for, they're cooled to a certain temperature, and that makes it a dedicated astro camera, versus a DSLR, conventional digital camera like Canon puts out or Nikon puts out. And they've been having this war for a while, and it's a cool little war. I don't know how much it means to y'all. The important thing, I think, is to use what you got. If you got a DSLR, start taking pictures. But let's get formal on the presentation. Adam, am I still coming out okay?
Yes, we still hear you.
Big question number one. DSLR, you already have one, so use it. It's inexpensive. It's probably a really good one. Will cost you $1,300 to $1,600 to, well, $3,000, but that's like getting past really good. That's getting up into the pro models, as opposed to the cooled astro cameras, which start at $1,200 to $1,400 before you can get serious. And to get serious into them, they're at least $3,000 and on up, not counting the other things you need to go along with it. DSLRs have other uses. You can tell your wife that you're going to buy her a nice camera and you're just going to use it at night. And that's cool. So you can get one of these pretty easily. And they can both take video and one shot. And you'll see that when you're talking about taking pictures of various sorts, you need both video and one shot if you're going to take all kinds of astro images. They generally have larger chips, not necessarily true, but generally they have larger chips. And that's really cool about them is that they're all in one. You can carry them around. You don't need to take backyard EOS and a computer and a lot of other things with you. They generally come in color, which is nice if you want nice, simple photography. They are certainly easier to start and certainly less expensive. Contrast that with a cooled astro camera. What do they give you? I keep saying cooled. I mean by that regulated cooling. You can tell it to cool itself to minus 20 degrees. It'll go there and it will stay there. With cooling, cooling is less noisy. Okay, your picture is going to be less noisy. You're not going to get as much noise all the way through. And with regulated, that's a key thing. You might be able to cool DSLRs, or you may be imaging at minus 40 degrees, although if you're imaging at minus 40 degrees, it might not matter. But regulated stuff is easier to process. You've always got the same temperature out there. You always know what your darks have to be to match your lights and everything else like that. So it's a lot easier to process eventually a cooled astro camera photo than trying to match your darks and your lights with a DSLR photo. Generally speaking, the way these cameras are built, they're going to have much higher sensitivity. They tend to come with higher digitization, and they tend to have a more linear response. That may be changing, but in the past they've had a more linear response. What you get with a cooled astro camera is control. You have the ability to control things very much more precisely. You never know exactly what a DSLR is doing before it gives you a raw image. It does a little bit of stuff here and a little bit of stuff there, and you don't know what its values are for the color and things like that. One other thing that I think should be noted, with DSLRs, yeah, if you change them around and you fix this and you change that and everything else, spend a few $100, you can do some narrowband imaging. But you can do narrowband imaging with the average mono CCD or cooled astro camera. So a DSLR is easier and less expensive, but a cooled astro camera, dedicated astro camera, has a higher top end. You can eventually take better pictures with a cooled astro camera. And in the long run, that makes it easier. If what you want are pictures you can show your wife and your secretary and say, hey, look, I can take pictures of the stars and gaseous nebula way out there, either one of these things will do. But if you want to start impressing people, really, you got to go with the higher top end. Notice that little note in the corner. A violinist bows with his right hand. Well, assuming he's right-handed. One would think that you know, you got to be agile with that, and most of us are more agile with our dominant hand, our right hand in my case, and yet to really move past everybody else, to really get everything you want out of that violin, it's the bowing that matters. It's not the fingering of the frets on the strings. Okay, so if you really want to get good eventually, you're going to have to learn how to use a CCD. To summarize, remember last week or 2 weeks ago, I said that you had to really consider what kind of pictures you want to take. You can see that the Canon or the Nikon or whatever other camera you're using, they're generally jacks of all trades. They can be used in a lot of things, and for some things they're much better. But if you really want to take deep space, you really want to get into a cool CCD camera. If you want to do scientific research, you want to get into a cooled camera, okay? But by the way, when I say CCD camera, that's just a leftover. You'll see when I get talking about that in a minute. I'm going to pause here for questions. Can you, are there any questions, Adam?
We can still hear you, and no, there are no new questions.
Okay, cool. All right. Big question number 2. Should I buy a monochrome or a one-shot color? To start with, I've got to tell you, all sensors, with the possible exception of the Foveon, are mono sensors. The basic chip way down underneath there, the photodiode, can only tell if it's been struck by something, a gamma ray, an electron, or a photon, some kind of photon has struck it. And if it does, it says, whoop, there's something, count it. It doesn't know what color it is. It doesn't know anything about it. It doesn't know whether it's heat from infrared. It doesn't know where it's coming from. So all sensors are mono. But to make color, what you do is you put a Bayer array, and this is a typical Bayer array. You get a blue, a green, and a red in a circle, in a square of 4, and then it repeats: a blue, a green, a red, and it keeps on going all the way until the chip's completely filled. This illustration's not exactly right. This should be white light coming in here. And then see where it's colored here? All right, it's still white light coming in here, and then it changes to whatever color is in the Bayer array. And this one's a green one, so only green light's going to get through. And this one's a red one, so only red light's going to get through. Blue light's going to get through on that one. So each sensor down here is seeing one of the three colors, and there's two for every green. There's two greens for every blue or red, because our eye is more sensitive to green, and they are, after all, trying to duplicate what our eye sees. If this was the original scene, and you look at the green channel, you can see things that are kind of a moderate green up here are kind of covered gray. But also, I want you to notice there's a whole lot of black holes in the middle. There's no blue in here, so there's no blue there. There's not much red in there, so there's not much red there. See what I mean? So you've actually got holes all over the place. That's because you're only seeing the green channel. There's a red channel, and these reds would show up a lot brighter, and whites would show all three colors because they're composed of red, blue, and green. But the green back here wouldn't show up in the, well, that's what you're seeing here. The blue wouldn't show up in this area up here, so those would be black pixels. This is what it looks like when you actually color code it. And look down here. See the different colors down here? See how when you're into the red part up here, or the white part, you get the red and the green and the blue all showing off because it's white. That's red, blue, and green. Over here, see how it's just the red showing up because you're looking at that red flower over there. This is a blown up, so you're looking at the red flower right there. So this is red, but you'll notice you're not getting any blue or green. And this, folks, is the problem you're going to have with a mono sensor. This is the efficiency of a of the chip itself, the thing that's way down there and the chip itself, okay? And you'll notice that it's this sensitive. And so if you're monochrome and you don't have those red, blue, and green filters in there, that you're going to get all the way up to the top, okay? And so that's what you're after. Well, what they do in a DSLR, or a one-shot color, I should say, I'll get to that in a minute, is they filter out the various levels so that you're automatically going to get less. Here's a comparison down here. If you unfilter the CCD, look at the dynamic range, or look at the range of exposures you can get. If you put a luminance filter on it, you're going to be cutting out the infrared up here. You don't want that infrared in there because it screws things up, and probably the ultraviolet and stuff like that, it screws it up down here. And so what you're going to get is this stuff here on a DSLR. All right. Now, we'll see later that we actually want some of this stuff that's been cut out, but not all of it. So we'll get to that. Okay. So should you get a mono or a one-shot color? Let's summarize. Mono one-shot colors are available either for a DSLR or an astro camera. This is not the distinction between astro camera and DSLR, although we tend to generalize because DSLRs are almost all one-shot colors and astro cameras are almost all monochrome. There's a tremendous expense if you want to take color pictures with a monochrome camera. You have to pay for filter wheel, which is anywhere from $300 or $400 up to thousands, and filters, which are anywhere from $100 each to $300-400 each. And so, if you want to invest in monochrome with color filters, you're going to spend a lot. In one-shot color, you only get what the Bayer array allows. It's throwing out all the other photons that are hitting it. Ease of acquisition, that you may think that goes to the one-shot color because all you do is you take the picture and you get your picture. Well, not exactly, because that's all you're doing with a monaural or with a monochrome camera. You're just taking a picture, and only you have a red filter in there, or a blue filter, or a green filter. If you're using image acquisition software like SGP or any of those other Maxim, well, that's already taken care of that stuff for you. There's no challenge to getting it to take different pictures. Now, it's true that for every frame that you're going to get, eventually, you're going to have to take 4 different types with 4 different types of filters if you want L, R, G, and B. Some people get by with RGB. That's fine. However, when it comes to, you're going to have more lights and you're going to have more flats because you need flats for each of your different filters. Your darks can be pretty much the same as long as the expressions or the exposures and so forth have stayed the same. Your processing, remember we talked earlier about the ease of use versus the control. You get a whole lot more control over monochrome. You get, because you can shift things around. However, when you get right down to it, it's not very hard to change the slider and change your color balance when you're using a one-shot color. For quality though, for most people, I think that they find out that there's more noise and more dynamic range in a dedicated Astro camera. Now we've talked about that. Noise and dynamic range are the thing you got to look at. I think I've said it before. Mono has a higher top end. Mono with color filters will give you a better picture eventually. But one-shot colors are easier to start with. And besides that, you probably have a DSLR one-shot color, so go ahead and start with it. Okay, looking at whether we should use a one-shot color camera or a monochrome camera with a color filter wheel. For almost everything, again, the one-shot color looks like it's got an X in every place. But for filter wheels and monochrome cameras, they excel in deep space and again in scientific studying. And by the way, for scientific studying, you need some filters, but you don't need all these filters, and you might even be able to get away without a filter wheel. So I think that's the end of, that's actually big question number 2, isn't it? Mono versus one-shot color. But anybody got any questions out there?
No new questions.
Okay. Now we're getting to a question that you guys were talking about while I was messing with my sound system here. And that question was, should you buy a CCD or a CMOS? Well, back in the 1960s, they were both invented. They were actually invented at the same time. And I think it was David, was talking about how there's a big difference in the number of wires and the number of elements and things like that. But there are some things that are the same. Both of them use a photodiode. And that photodiode is just a piece of material that changes photons into electrons. In a CCD, those are collected in that well we talked about last time, and then they're dumped out into a register that brings them back down, and then they're amplified as they come off, and then they're recorded. And this process takes a while. CMOS sensors are a little bit different in that all those electronics, as David was saying, is all pretty much in the same place. So you get your photodiode, just like you do over here, but then it's all pretty much processed before it's sent, oops, back up, back down, before it's sent off. And so it takes care of a lot of the processing right here. As a result, this is a lot faster. But back in the olden days, getting all those electronics stuffed into the same place on the chip was rather difficult. They just didn't have the manufacturing techniques to do it. As a result, CCDs really ran away with the field. It was just easier to make them. They made them, and they've been developing it, and they developed them for 40, 50 years now, and they're at the peak of their game. CMOS sensors couldn't get into the game because it was too hard to manufacture them, essentially. Once they got better at manufacturing them, though, they're coming on strong, all right? So in the future, there will be maybe a difference, but it's going to matter less and less. As of right now, CCDs are generally more, in the past for sure, CCDs were generally more uniform. That is, a certain amount of light hitting it would give you a certain, register a certain ADU count. CMOS, however, were faster. But you can't put a whole CCD necessarily in all that electronics and run slow in our cell phones. And that's what's driving a lot of the development in CMOS technology. Richard Wright, one of our buddies here, had a real good conclusion to his article in Sky and Telescope about choosing a camera. And what he said was, don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about what's under the hood. You have to worry about how fast it goes, how low the noise is, how the dynamic range is, and all that other stuff. I would add to that that CMOS sensors may be catching up, but their packaging, the cameras that hold them, the coolers on them, the bit depth and things like that, they haven't quite caught up there yet. So don't judge it by whether it's called a CCD or a CMOS. Don't judge it by what kind of stuff they've got on the photodiode. Judge it by what it's getting you. Its dynamic range, its noise level, and things like that, how it fits into your needs. And that does it for CCD versus CMOS. Are there any questions so far? Nope, I'm actually watching the questions over there. I've seen a terrific image from M51 from Craig Camp, made with an ASI 1600, and that's going to cause us some questions. Yes, there are some good images. By the way, somebody who's good at imaging can make an image out of almost anything. I mean, people used to do it with film. They aren't quite the same as they are today. Our standards are a lot higher, but you know, you can make good images out of it. So, but the results are not quite in on that new camera out of who is it? ASI. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about video or still frame. Which should I buy, a video or a still frame camera? Here's a single image taken with a DSLR, I assume, because it's just off Jerry Rodriguez's webpage. If you stack that together with 2 images, it gets a lot cleaner. If you stack it together with 4 images, it gets cleaner. Well, what, my friends, if you stack it together with a couple of 100 images, like you do with the video? It gets a whole lot quieter, and you can isolate what you want out of it and only take the good parts out of everything. So that's cool. This, if it works, nothing else is working today, so I don't know why it should work. Can you see the little sun, how it's shaking and shimmering and bouncing around over there? That's bad seeing. That's a video camera taking take 15 frames a second, and I stack up 100 of them. And now look over here. This is the still frame version of the same thing. And as you can see in the still frame version, actually it's not the same. That movie is not the basis of this picture, but the idea is the same. You can get a whole lot more detail out of it when it stops shifting around like that. You can do that by something that's being called popularly lucky imaging, although that's lucky imaging is a scientific term, we maybe shouldn't be using it. But it's by stacking hundreds of frames and taking the best part of each frame. You can only do that, realistically speaking, with a video camera. Another thing you can do with the video camera that you can't do with the still camera very easily is set up this big old thing I told you about last time around out of the desert. The Southern California Desert Video Astronomers have this big show, and these are 10 foot tall, 22 feet wide, something like that. They've got this beautiful display. You make great outreaches with videos with the Malin cam. Let me tell you what Rock Malin says. You get all these wonderful advantages. I won't read them one by one to you, but I've been to these. You can read them as I'm babbling on here. I've been to these shows where they put these displays up there. I've seen things coming in on the internet where people have Malin cams and they're displaying what they're showing. They get real excited about the fact that, you know, you can see these things essentially live. They're actually usually about a minute delayed. They're usually minute integrations and then added together and then stacked in together. But they really are wonderful, and I'd suggest you get a Malin cam if you do a lot of this kind of work. But if you're taking pretty pictures, I want you to consider the quality of what you're getting with this. If what you want is that lucky imaging like down here on the corner, okay, the sun down here, yeah, that's pretty good. But I want you to look at the rest of these images. Now, these images are off of Rocky Malin, the Malin Cam website. These are the best images he's got to show off. How many of us would be satisfied with the dynamic range and the lack of noise in all of these pictures? I think that if you want pretty pictures like that, like, you know, like M20 and M8 and M42 and is that 51, you kind of need to go with the still frame camera, the good old fashioned, take a bunch of stack of 5, 10, 15-minute exposures and go from there. So to summarize, video or still frame, it's good for outreach and lucky imaging type things. It's probably not so hot for other types of imaging. All right. I don't see any new questions coming in, so I'm going to go on with camera and tube match. There's a lot said about camera and tube match. There's a lot of things you need to know in order to understand the language of what people are saying when they say, oh, you don't have the right field coverage, you don't have the right this, that, the other thing. Let's go through some of these terms. And when you get all said and done about this, what I'm going to tell you is quit being so fussy. All right? So here we go. Image circle. In the back of your camera, in the back of your imaging train someplace, there is an area where all the optics of your telescope has distributed the light. And it comes out to be a circle. And the circle has these characteristics. Down the middle, it's usually pretty sharp and pretty bright. The further out you go, the poopier it looks. It starts getting dimmer, objects start getting misshapen, colors start getting squirrely, and everything else like that. But there is this thing called the image circle, and that's the whole display of what light actually comes through. Now, field of view is something you're going to have to decide upon. Do you want to look down at one small object and make it look very big, or do you want to get a whole wide range of objects? Here's the spider and the fly. See the spider? He's coming over here and he's going to get the fly. And see how he's got his spider web and his legs stretched out and everything else like that. Nice, pretty picture, lots of colors and everything else. Here, folks, at a different field of view is the fly. It's called the Little Orion Nebula. What is it, 1831 or 1891 or something like that. And it's got a little trapezium in it and some reflection nebula and emission nebula. But that's all right here. This was taken with a telescope with 2450 millimeters field of view, and this one's taken with 700 and some millimeter field of view. So you can see, or 750 focal length. This one has a much narrower actual sky field of view than this one does, and you're going to have to decide what your field of view is going to be. Let's say you've got a, we're talking about field of view here. You got a star right here. It's actually light. It's kind of shining out in all directions. But by the time it's crossed the vast area of space, it's coming in at fairly parallel rays until it hits that first optic. This is a refractive optic, but it works the same the other way. And you can see it bends up, bends down, and it comes to focus right about here. Then it passes through to where an eyepiece would catch it. Up here, there's another object. See this little yellow star, for instance? It's also coming in. And it hits up here, and it comes down here. And another part of it hits here, and it comes to focus right there. And another part of it hits down here and is refracted back up to here. If you want to catch both this and that, if you want to catch both this and that, both this little yellow star and this big white one, you're going to have something that actually fits that whole area here. This is your image circle here. This pink box is your image circle. It's making light all the way around there. Now maybe the edge of the light's not too good, or maybe the edge of the image circle is not too good, but that whole image circle is being projected back here. If you have a sensor that is only this big in this little blue example, well, you're only going to catch the light from around here. You're not going to catch the light up here because it's coming to focus way down here. So you need a bigger sensor. You need a sensor that can catch both sides. So the first thing, one of the things you have to consider is just how big an image sensor you need back there. You've seen this picture before if you watched the last show. We're going to talk about pixel scale. You know that these are the wells that we've talked about. There's rain coming down. If you've got a big wide pixel, you can catch this rain, that rain, all of these rains are going to fall in here, so you're going to catch a lot. If you've only got this wide, well, you're only going to catch this one, that one, this one's going to miss, that one's going to miss, this one's going to get there, that one's going to get there. But so you get very fine resolution. You're only going to get the pixels, the raindrops that are coming straight down here. With this one, you're not going to get nearly the resolution because all of these pixels are going to register in this same area. All right. So let's talk about difference between resolution and well depth, and this is the trade-off that you got to make. It was said for a long time that little pixels aren't good for astroimaging. The reason little pixels aren't good for astroimaging is because they're small, like this. They can't gather enough of the dim light that we want, whereas big pixels can. So we need big pixels. But so they said, don't go with the littler pixels. But what they forgot in all that is that as they developed the littler pixels, the smaller pixels, they were coming up with better materials and better electronics, so that many times these little pixels nowadays are more sensitive than these bigger pixels from before. So don't, again, get hung up in what the size of the pixels are as far as their well depth goes, so much as how sensitive they are and what their dynamic range are. Pixel scale matters because if you have too big a pixel, you can't define your object very well. See the stair steps going down the side of this A? If you have smaller pixels, you don't get quite the stair steps, you get a smoother ride. Well, that's your resolution kicking in, all right? So the smaller the pixel scale, the more resolution you're going to get out of it, although you have given up some of that well depth perhaps. Also, you've got to consider whether you're going to be undersampling or oversampling. Both these things are horrible things to do, according to some. For others, they're like, hey, why are you worried about it so much? Well, here's why you can worry about it if you're into worrying about it. If you've got a small star and you don't have enough pixels to sample that star, you're going to get a square star. Even if that star is located right in the middle, it's still going to come out kind of square. If you've got a bigger star using that same size, you're still going to get a big square. If, however, your star stays the same, but you get more pixels to it, look at your resolution. It starts to look more like a star. So that's why you have to have more pixels. The rule in general is that the smallest thing that you can see should be on at least 2 pixels. So the question becomes, what's the smallest thing you can see? Well, the smallest thing you can see is determined somewhat by the resolution of your optics, but for the majority of us, it's dependent upon the seeing. Seeing is, for most of us, in the 2 to 4 second range, if we don't have one of those fancy observatories far out on the top of a mountain someplace. So we want to try for 1 to 2 second coverage of each pixel. If the smallest thing you can see should be on at least 2 pixels, try for half the seeing, because the seeing is going to determine how small anything is eventually. Now, what is that? You can actually figure it out. There's a formula for it. You can do some algebra and find out that there's an easier formula for finding out what you need to know. But you know what? There are easier ways yet, and I'm going to show you some of that in a minute, rather than go through the whole formula. Let's talk about sensor size for a minute. Were there any questions so far? I should probably stop for questions. I don't see any coming in on the Q&A. By the way, guys, you know that you should sign into your Google account, and as you're watching the YouTube presentation, you can just go ahead and type in your questions, and we'll try to answer them as well as we can. Let's see, where are we? Okay, we're on sensor size. Remember the picture of the image circle? How much of that image circle do you want to capture? If you just want the good part, right in here, without this poopy stuff out here, maybe this orange stuff is the sensor size that you want. And you're going to get a very cropped in picture of Thor's helmet here. If, however, you want to use a larger size, look, out in the corner, it's going to vignette, and you're going to be getting pretty good display of those poopy pixels, the ones that are misshapen out there. All right? So you want to be careful with that. You don't want something where your image circle coming out of the optic, your image circle is here, and you've got a big old sensor like that. That's this yellowish situation right here, because you're going to get a whole lot of the ugly part of the image circle in your camera. You don't want that. Over here, you're wasting. Right about here is right about right. Your image circle is bigger, but not too much bigger than your camera or than your telephoto, than your lens and optics are delivering. You've seen this picture before in the last presentation. There's M51 back there. And depending on which sensor you get, these are typical for a DSLR. Here's a full frame 35 millimeter DSLR or a very expensive cooled astro camera. And the bigger the sensor is, the more field of view you're going to get. Here are some common sensor sizes, and here's how they compare. Some of the really fast cameras coming out of Sony are down in the smaller range, whereas the big CCDs might be up in the bigger range from Kodak. Okay, that's interesting. One of the trade-offs you get when you get, where were we? When you get more pixels across like this, smaller pixels, is you get more megapixels. And you have to ask yourself the question, do you really need megapixels? This is a 32 by 32 array of pixels over here. My QSI is 3,320 on a side, plus was 2,800 on the other side. I forgot to finish making that slide. How many megapixels do you need? For astro imaging, don't buy things based on megapixels. I can just tell you that generally. This is a 15-inch laptop screen. It's 1440 by 900. It only uses 1.3 megapixels. 720p, which is pretty good resolution for most of us. That uses 9/10 of a megapixel. 1080p, 2.3. A 5 megapixel image, okay, it's 4.9 to fill a 2560 by 1920 monitor. All right, you really don't need all that much in the way of megapixels. Now, I'll change that recommendation if you're the kind of person who wants to crop your pictures after you've captured them and you want to cut out the edges. Well, then maybe you do need more megapixels because you're going to be throwing out a lot of them. But generally speaking, don't buy a camera based on the number of megapixels you're going to buy. If you are making prints, an 8x10 print needs about 7.2 megapixels at 300 dots per inch. And there are ways around that. So you really don't need nearly as many megapixels as you might think you do. Finally, let's talk about usable field when we're trying to match our camera to our tube. That's the last of the big definitions you need to know about. Optics in generally don't deliver a flat plane, and flat planes are what come in camera. There are Schmidt cameras that were made, and what they did was they bent the film so that the film plane would follow where the optics were. And that made for some pretty good imaging, back for its day. Things like field curvature, chromatic aberration, coma, and spherical aberration all affect where the images are going to focus. This isn't a presentation on optical aberrations and optics in general. Back in my mirror making days, I've ground a few mirrors, and these things were all important back then. Now I go ahead and get the correctors and so forth and so on. There are ways around each of these problems. This is a lens aberration where you've got field curvature coming around like this. Well, field curvature also matters here because you're going to get coma, and spherical aberration is because the light rays are focusing along a line, a horn it's called, and this is chromatic aberration where different color lights with refractive optics focus at different points because of their index of refraction. These are all things that have to be coped with. They can be coped with, okay? But they should be coped with, and you've got to understand that the key to understanding this is your image circle, because when they compute the image circle, they take all that stuff into account. After you've corrected for this and that, how much of a flat image circle do you have? Up the middle has always been easy. It's always easy to grind an optic that's sharp up the middle. It's the edges where you got to worry about it. So what do? My piece of advice here is from Takahashi in astrophysics. Where is that? Image circle. It tells you just how big that image circle is. And what you want to do, of course, is select a sensor whose dimensions, whose long horizontal dimension, not horizontal, excuse me, diagonal dimension fits within that image circle. For the astrophysics, you can see that with this field flattener, it'll get you that, and with that field flattener, it'll get you that. So you got to look this stuff up if you want to match it perfectly. Or if you're lazy like I am, in the last presentation, you saw New Astronomy Press CCD calculator, and I've got this particular URL louder, big enough so that everybody can read it easily. You can see that you can enter all the information about your telescope and which camera you're using, and it knows which cameras have which size and things like that. And it knows the dimensions of your pixels and things like that. And it knows your chip size. And then you can call up different images that you want to display it on, and you can see how it works out in your particular case. Okay, so with this particular telescope and that particular camera, this is the image I would be getting. All right, so think that out, and that's what you can get. Use Ron Wadowski's calculator. By the way, there are lots of other calculators that look like that. All right, let's summarize. As far as camera and tube match, match your pixel size if you need to. Match it 1 or 2 arc seconds per pixel. Match your chip size, the physical dimension of your overall size of your chip, to your image circle. But, and here's the part I want to emphasize with you, don't go crazy on it. The reason you can't go crazy is because unless you're really rich and buying stuff all the time, you're going to be buying a new camera every time you buy a new tube. And that gets really expensive after a while. Get yourself the lowest noise, most sensitive camera you can get, the highest dynamic range, and use it. You're going to be using it for years. Same thing with your tubes. You're probably going to be swapping them around. Now, there are things you can do so that you don't have to be quite that obsessive. You can bin your chips. You can combine 2, 3, or 4 pixels together, 4x4, 3x3, etc., and that changes the size of your effective pixel. You're going to have different tubes. You're going to have different conditions. What may be a perfect telescope would be wonderful if you had perfect seeing. But if you don't have perfect seeing, it doesn't matter. You're kind of wasting a lot of obsession that you did trying to get the perfect match between your pixel size and your tube. Okay, there are no new questions that I can see over there. Is that true over there, Adam? You're looking at both data streams. I'm only looking at the questions and answers.
Yep, that's the case.
Narrowband. There's question number 6. Narrowbands makes for really pretty pictures. Both these pictures were taken in my backyard. I live about 60 miles from Los Angeles, and there's another 20 miles or so of Los Angeles extending to the east of me. Narrowband takes advantage of the fact that light pollution comes mostly in here, and what you image comes here, here, and here. And because you're going on only a narrow slice in between, you can get images in your backyard, even with the moon out. You can get some pretty good images. I bring this up because some people say, well, I want to get a DSLR, but I want a narrowband. And I don't see how one can, practically speaking, one can image with a DSLR camera without altering the DSLR camera in a number of ways. For one thing, these pictures take a half an hour. Oh, I was going to explain. You need a mono camera. The mono camera means that when you put your narrowband filter on it, you can just slice out that particular, let me see, 03, right there, this aqua color. You want to grab that chunk of light, and generally that chunk of light. You can't check these others out, but your big money bet is this hydrogen alpha, and then S2 and 03, and you get them, and you notice these are the light pollution bands right in through here. All right, so these light pollution bands, you miss them. You just don't take their picture, and because of that, you can combine your pictures in that special way. But you've got to have a mono camera, and there are very few mono cameras in the DSLR range. All right. There are some issues with narrowband colors. You get artificial colors. You have to assign the colors. You'll notice that um, two of your colors, hydrogen alpha and S2, are generally up in the reds. And this one is not blue, it's kind of aquamarine or teal color. So how do you get, well, these aren't natural looking colors. These aren't real colors. You can do it, you can get close, but you're even then going to have a little bit of a problem. This is typical of early narrowband imaging. People have found ways to get around it, but you see the star colors often cause problems in narrowband imaging. They tend to come out magenta if you do some of the standard combinations of assignment of colors and things like that. So there are some things you've got to learn when you want to do narrowband, but rule number one is you're going to have to start with a mono camera. And if you're starting with a mono camera, you're probably talking about a dedicated astro camera, okay? The big range of big question number 7 is about DSLR modification. Should I modify my DSLR? Let's talk about DSLR modifications. There are basically 2 types: spectrum modification and cooling modification, and some cameras come with both spectrum and cooling modified. They can be done by manufacturers, they can be done by modifiers, you know, people that you send them your camera, they modify it, send it back to you. Or you can do it yourself if you're particularly brave and like dealing with small parts and Murphy's Law. But we need to talk about the cost, the warranty, Murphy's Law itself, and some of the lost advantages. The costs you can see here. The modification of services usually include putting in some other kind of filter and doing some work. And that costs, like on this particular model, $750. It can be done for less than that. It can be done for more than that. Or if you're a do-it-yourselfer, you can even do this yourself. You probably want to buy a filter, and they're going to cost you $100 or $200 to put in a new filter in there. We'll talk about that as we go on. You've lost any warranty you might have had on your camera. You generally get a warranty on these conversion types, but they're for relatively little time, just to prove that they did it and you get it back. There are all sorts of itty bitty weird things that can go wrong when you're doing this, particularly if you're doing it yourself. I've talked to Hap Griffin about you know, how his business goes and stuff like that, and he wants some of them because they're just too expensive to mess with in case you screw it up, and even feels like he's got to worry about it, you know, stuff like that. Why would you want to modify? Let's talk about spectrum modification. This is what your CCD is sensitive to. Big long line from here all the way over to there. And everything down here, your CCD can see. And yes, that includes, they're up here above the infrared and above the reds. The human eye can only see in here. So what they did was they made DSLR cameras so that they would respond like the human eye sees. Okay, they made the DSLR, digital single lens reflex camera, to respond in this range right down in here. They did that by putting filters in. Well, we don't like those filters because we want some of the lights that's right in here. We want those things back. We want our camera to see as much as they can of that. So the human eye is different than a photodiode. To modify the bandwidth, you've got several choices. You can completely remove any of the filters that they put in there, and that changes everything. You get all the light. Defocused infrared light tends to defocus because it focuses at a different place, generally speaking. You lose your automatic focusing. You lose your viewfinder calibration. A clear glass filter, you get to keep some of those things, automatic focusing and some of the other things, but you're still going to need some infrared filters because otherwise you've got some of the problems with focusing and some of the heat or some of the image coming in from heat instead of really light that you want. A third type of bandwidth modification is to replace the infrared with a UV replacement filter, and that's the one that's quite often recommended. And then there are even those who will take off the bare matrix, which means that you no longer have a color camera. Now, one of the things that this is a pretty tricky one down here. I don't know if I'd want to mess with that, but it involves scraping off a bare matrix, and pretty interesting. I've never tried doing it, of course, but um, you can see that different modifications have different effects. This is a full spectrum modification, and then they put in a CLS CCD clip filter in here. And you'll notice that these are the light pollution bands. You'll notice that it cut out all the light pollution bands. And down here is another light pollution band. It doesn't see them because they built a filter specially made to cut out so that it won't see that. This is the original Canon, and it would have picked up all that light problem in through there. You'll notice that the original Canon doesn't go very high. It's, where's my hydrogen alphas right in here someplace, okay? And the original one, it's already fading out here, but with the other modifications, you can see I can get my hydrogen alpha. Why is hydrogen alpha important? Because that's what those pretty nebula glow in, the emission nebula glow in hydrogen alpha. So it's sitting right up here, and you want to be able to get it. Manufacturers have astro cameras. The Canon 60DA is a replacement for the 20DA from years ago. Here you can see the difference between a regular, this is a Nikon, regular Nikon, and this is the modified, the manufacturer modified, sold specifically as an astro camera. But I'll let you know, remember when I talked about the advantages of DSLRs, how they were cheap and they could be used for other things? Well, not anymore. Once you've made these changes, they cannot be used, or at least they cannot be used easily. You have to add all sorts of filters and special processing and some other things. Now, they're not horrible. Yeah, you can still figure out how to use them, but you can see that there is a substantial difference in the California Nebula here. This is what it is in a regular camera. This is what it is in one of those modified cameras, and you can see why. Here's an EOS 40D, here's a 60DA. See how much more red you get? Well, of course, it's going to show up here, all right? But as Jerry Rodriguez points out, if what you're after is that red, don't go buy the 60DA. Actually, he doesn't point that out. I pointed out using his pictures. I think Jerry's neutral on the subject. But this is a stock 60DA, okay? Not modified. Well, you wouldn't not modify a 60DA. You've already spent an extra $500 or $600 just to get their modification of it. Compare that to the amount of red and the intensity of the nebula you get with a modified T2I, which is the 550D. All right, you can see that while the manufacturer has modified it, he hasn't modified it enough to make you happy. Remember the half track in World War II? It could either go off the road, run on those tracks in the back, or it could stay on the road and run on those wheels in the front. Unfortunately, it couldn't do either very well, because on the road it had those tracks it had to mess with, and out on the wilderness it had those tires that it had to mess with. Well, my opinion is on the 60DA, as nice as an idea as it might have been, it's neither fish nor fowl, and you've spent a whole lot more money for it. Spectrum mod issue. There's the expense. You are paying more for it. It's still generally a one-shot color, so it's not going to be real good for narrowband imaging. And you lose the other things you bought the DSLR for. You can't just take pictures of the family with it as easily and all that other stuff. Now, you can fix some of these problems, but not all of them very easily. Remember I said there were two kinds of modification that people are doing with their DSLRs. Spectrum modification is the one we just finished with. DSLR modification for cooling is the second kind. You can see flashing back and forth the cooled versus the uncooled version of the DSLR. And that fits in with what we learned a couple of weeks ago. The warmer it is, the more electrons you've got of noise. And the cooler you can get it, the cooler it gets. So what you do is you cool this. So that's why you cool it. Well, you got to pay some bucks for that. Now, it may not be very many bucks. There are lots of people who are building these things on their own. There's a thread that is now up to 98 pages or something on Cloudy Nights, where I actually haven't looked at it since it had about 8 pages on it. I don't know what they're doing on it now, but they've got a plan to build some kind of DSLR cooler that'll go right on there. I don't know how much it's going to cost by the time they finish it, but knowing them, it probably won't cost them so much. If you want to buy it from somebody, it's going to cost you many hundreds of dollars, $400 I've seen on some, 295 I think on another one. So you're gonna have to remember the whole reason you're using the DSLR. One of the reasons you're using the DSLR is the expense. Well, if you keep adding to this expense, at what point should you have gotten a cooled astro camera? A big issue: what's actually getting cooled? You can cool the ambient air around a DSLR, but what makes you think it's going to get all the way back down the sensor, which is what really needs to be cooled down? If you're not cooling the sensor, you're not doing much. If you get that sensor cool enough, at what point do you start getting new? It's a question you're going to ask yourself. Also, you're just cooling the sensor. You're not necessarily cooling it on a regulated basis where you know exactly what the temperature is and you match the temperatures out. So you got to be careful with that. Should you modify it? Well, for my thinking, I would avoid modifications too much. I might buy a modified camera if I had the bucks and I wanted certain things. I lose the other uses of the camera. It is expensive. However, for a mission Nebula, when I'm out there, you know, remote, and I don't want to take my big imaging rig with me and stuff like that, I might want to do a Spectrum mod. And if that's all I had, and it was summertime, I can't image with the DSLR most of the time during the summer. I need some kind of cooling. So maybe I would, but generally speaking, I'd prefer to go the other way. Okay, I don't see any questions on Q&A. Do we have any on the other stream?
Nope.
Okay. Let's go on to big question number 8, anti-blooming. Remember these little wells? The electrons coming in? Too many come in, they spill over. When they spill over, they get ugly. So you can invent something, or they have invented something, that was the incoming electrons come in, and they get to a certain point, they roll off. Okay? And that's called an anti-blooming gate. And when you have an anti-blooming gate, you lose those extra electrons. They get absorbed, and they're not going to wreck your picture like this. By the way, you can fix these things a little bit, not if it gets this extreme maybe, but you can handle it whether you got a blooming gate or not. We'll get to that. This is what a sensor looks like without an anti-blooming gate. We talked about this last time. For every X number of light intensity, you get Y value of pixel, and it's linear. It's 1-to-1 relationship as you're going up, or 2-to-1 or 5-to-1, whatever the relationship is, it stays the same. However, that's without an anti-blooming gate. If you put an anti-blooming gate in here, that's true for a while. It stays linear, but then at some point it says, "Whoops, I'm getting full here. I better get rid of some of these," and it starts rising a little more slowly. Now, there's nothing wrong with this for pretty pictures. As a matter of fact, it might be exactly what you want. But if you're doing science, it can cause you a problem. They're both eventually going to reach the saturation stage so that they're both up at 65K or whatever it's going to be eventually. But for this one, you know that until it gets to saturation, you know what the relationship is, so you know exactly how much light intensity it puts out. Here, you don't know quite so well. Now, you still can do science with this kind of a sensor, with the anti-blooming gate sensor, but you have to be more careful to keep it down in this linear range. So should you buy an anti-blooming gate or not? Definitely, if you're going to be dedicated to taking scientific imaging, you probably don't need to worry about having an anti-blooming gate. If, however, excuse me, if, however, you're taking pretty pictures, yeah, probably you want an anti-blooming gate in there. So you want an anti-blooming camera. And that's the big questions. That's all of them. Anybody else out there have any questions? How we doing? Adam, you there?
Yes, I'm here. I don't see any other questions.
Okay. Let me give you some last minute advice about buying your sensor. I'm assuming you dialed in tonight in order to have some advice about your sensor. I hope what I've done is educate you on the kinds of questions you need to ask and tell you a little bit about the issues that are involved one way or the other. But I've got some other advice for you too. I used to be in charge of Beginner's Corner up at RTMC, and every year I'd put on a series of talks about to beginner astronomers, and they'd say, "Hey, is it worth it to do this, or should I do that?" And I tell them, "Look, I don't know if you drove up here in a VW microbus that you had to push the last half mile, or you drove up in the big Lexus convertible. I don't know you. I don't know what your imaging goals are. I don't know what money's worth to you. I don't know about how you value time and convenience, frustration. I certainly don't know how you feel about status. When I told the guys the other day that I was upgrading my Vista machine to Windows 10, which is probably why I couldn't get the sound to work tonight, they all laughed at me. And they are lucky that I don't care about status, or I would have walked out in a fit of pique right then and there. But you know, I don't care about the status part so much. Other people do. They've got to have the latest and the greatest. So don't ask me whether something is worth it to you. You can ask me what my advice is on how to apply this or how to apply that or what this means or what that means. But don't ask me whether it's worth it to you. I think that there are a lot of us that put up with a lot of frustrations by using inferior equipment that we can get over by buying more expensive equipment. But if it means that the family's not going to eat, well, you know, that's up to you. Secondly, you can rent a lot of this equipment on cloudy nights in Astroworld. Now, there is no rental section on these websites. What you do is you go and you buy something and you use it for 3 months or 6 months or 8 months, and then you sell it back. And the amount of money you lost is the rent that you paid. So you can do that with a lot of this stuff. If you be careful, don't try it with, you know, if you buy new stuff, it's going to lose a lot of its value in that first little bit. And then when you try to resell it, it probably won't resell for quite as much. But if you're buying used stuff to get to learn how to use it, hey, you're not going to lose a whole lot. You know, with electronics, that's not quite as true as some other things. Electronics do go down in price because new models come along to make them obsolete. But a good old mount is still a good old mount, and a good old tube, still a good old tube, and a good old usable camera that's been used for a while. Hang in there. You're going to get your value when you sell it back later. You have to decide for yourself whether you want to just buy the best there is, you know, or you want to step up to something. Should you buy this camera now and then step up to another one later and step up to another one later? You decide that, what is best for you, what your style is. I am one that if I wanted to get into astro imaging right now and I had a DSLR sitting there, hey, I wouldn't worry about when I have to buy a CCD. I'd put the DSLR on and start learning. I would face certain frustrations, matching darks to lights for temperature, the fact that it's one-shot color. These things, yeah, it would be annoying, okay, but I could learn a lot of stuff. Next, do you want to be on the bleeding edge, or do you want to buy something that's obsolete? Remember, my 583, QSI 583, still takes essentially the same pictures as it took when I bought it, what is it, 4 or 5 years ago now. It's been replaced by the 683, and new cameras have come along that have made it even better. That doesn't make my 8300 obsolete. It just means that other things have come along that would be even more convenient, bigger chips, more sensitive, quieter, or anything like that, but it still works. Also, there are sometimes people invent things and they develop them and they start selling them and they don't quite have it worked out yet. Do you want to be, well, which side of that do you want to be? A tried and true product or right at the bleeding edge? Lastly, I think you ought to identify what's holding you back. If you aren't getting your guiding done right yet and you haven't learned polar alignment, then don't go buy a new mount. You'll be just as bad at polar aligning a new mount as you were the old mount. If you haven't figured out how to match your darks with your flats and things like that, don't go buy a new camera. You'll still have darks and flats, and you'll still have to learn how to match them. But if you've done all the things you can do, and you can identify the fact that it is definitely part of the equipment that's holding you back, then it's time to maybe consider upgrade. Trade up when you know you need to trade up because the equipment is holding you back. With me, I don't need new equipment right now. My processing is holding me back. My processing is the problem I've got. So until I get better, it doesn't matter what kind of camera I'm shooting with, really. I go crazy trying to keep getting a better camera when I can't even see the noise in my pictures yet. You know what I mean? So When you know you need it because it's the equipment holding you back, then it's time to consider trading up to something else. Okay, that's my old man advice, and that pretty much concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. We actually got one question in from Dennis Conti asking if you've ever heard of a charge injection device.
A charge injection device. I don't think so.
And if you haven't, I can ask Dennis to comment on what that is. And Dennis is actually our speaker for next week, so.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
So a charge injection device is a type of CCD that allows individual pixels to be addressed so that one can cause one pixel to continue to count photons while another pixel is not. So its use is being tested right now for detection of objects such as possibly faint exoplanets, for example, next to bright stars. So, so it's a device used in industry, but is now sort of finding its way into astronomy.
Well, no, I haven't. I've heard of devices that do what I would consider similar things. I haven't heard of it by that name. I was dealing with a fellow from Pomona College not too long ago that was looking for a sensor. Oh, it was looking for some an imaging rig that would go along with a device that sounds like what you're using there. Okay, but I didn't understand what he just needed my expertise in helping him find a mount and a tube, and yeah, and that is like way beyond what we were the kinds of questions we were dealing with tonight, as you could understand.
Maybe we'll hear a little bit about it next week. I didn't mention this yet, but Dennis will be on next week. His topic is exoplanet observing by amateurs. So we're going to get another science-based topic. First of all, I'll give you that last call. If you have any questions for Alex, type them in now, because having gone over, we'll probably be ending the presentation shortly. Quick reminder to just a few guys in the room, when I end the session, the guys in the room don't have to immediately exit. There's a few things I wanted to say, just do some housekeeping. Alex, thank you for that great presentation. Is there anything else you have, or is that basically it for your presentation?
My presentation's over, so that's what it was.
Okay, I'm just going to go back out and check. Yeah, the only other thing is Jurgen posted this image of M51 with an ASI 1600. This is the question we were using, or one of the comments when I was trying to stall while we were waiting for Alex to get on, and posted a M51 image, a grayscale image, 2,000 exposures, 1 second each, M51, and it's a pretty darn nice image of M51. Very impressive. I think that at least we can see what the capabilities are, not knowing the type of sky that the photographer Emil Kraykamp has. I have to assume he's under great skies, but wow, 200 seconds, or excuse me, 2,000 seconds, and let's just say it's much better than my 9-hour image that I took, of course, for my terrible skies, but very impressive. One of the few images I've seen with the 1600M, but also one of the best images I've seen with the 1600M. And again, I want to thank Alex for that great presentation. Very popular topic. We had a lot of people in the room tonight. Sorry for all the issues. We hope to get them addressed before Alex's next presentation. Maybe it had to do with that Windows 10 upgrade, but we'll get it all sorted out. And guys, thanks for coming, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.